Welcome everyone to tonight's extension session as part of Renew's Sustainable House Day program. My name's Cumming, and tonight I'm pleased to host the second session of our extension series, all about finding the right team for your build or reno project. This is a really important step, yet as I'm sure many viewers already know, it can be quite tricky to find people who share your sustainability goals. In this session, we'll offer guidance on how to select a team in your area that will guide your vision to life. We'll also provide an opportunity for audience Q&A with our experts. This is the second session in our 8-part series, following on from a great one on Tuesday when we delved into navigating the planning permission stage of your project. We still have 6 more sessions over the coming weeks, so if you haven't already, there's still time to purchase an extension session pass, which gives you access to all of them, as well as the recordings of any that you miss live. We'll be sharing the link in the chat tonight. We have people tuned in from all over the country today, from a wide variety of different traditional lands. I'm speaking from the traditional country of the Dja Dja Wurrung people in central Victoria, and I acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. As usual, we encourage you to share where you are joining from in the chat. Now a little bit about our panel. First, I'll properly introduce myself. I'm the editor of Sanctuary Modern Green Homes magazine, published by Renew, the organiser of Sustainable House Day. I have a long-standing interest in sustainable, energy-efficient and comfortable homes that tread lightly on the earth, and I really love being part of the mission to inspire and educate people about the design strategies, materials and systems available to achieve them. In Sanctuary, we're always trying to cover all bases, providing both deep dives into topics related to sustainable design, but without assuming too much knowledge on the part of our readers. Because of this, I'm really excited to be hosting this session tonight on finding your team, whether that be a sustainable builder, architect, designer, or other expert. I'm joined tonight by 3 knowledgeable panellists. First up, we have Dick Clarke. Dick is the president of Renew and the principal of Envirotecture. He's an accredited building designer with many years of experience, focusing exclusively on ecologically sustainable and culturally appropriate buildings, as well as sustainable design in vehicles and vessels. Over the years, he's received many design awards for his work. Welcome back, Dick. Next on the bill is Iain Wiebenga, founder and director at Keystone Construction based on the Surf Coast. Iain is a registered builder and green smart professional with over 15 years of experience in construction. He's passionate about environmentally responsible design and building strong, beautiful and durable houses using locally sourced materials. Hi, Iain. Thanks for being here tonight.
Hi, Anna. Thanks for the introduction.
Last but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome Simone Schenkel, the owner, founder and certified passive house designer at Gruen Eco Design. Through Gruen, Simone works with their clients to create not only beautifully designed homes that won't cost the earth, but also spaces that are healthy, thermally comfortable, energy efficient and resilient for future generations. Simone loves making the world a better place by improving the way houses are built and helping others to live a more sustainable life. She's also a regular on these panels. Thanks for joining us, Simone.
Hi, pleased to be here.
Before we begin, we want to give a huge thanks to our Sustainable House Day sponsors, the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action, Bank Australia, Sonnen, Hip v Hype, Design Matters National and Lighthouse Architecture and Science. And a special mention to the sponsors of tonight's session, Natters, Your Home and Design for Place. Okay, let's get started. During our discussion, I'll be putting viewers' questions to our panel. You can put your questions into Zoom's Q&A window at the bottom of the screen as we go, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Please be mindful that questions that are very specific or detailed may not be appropriate for a panel event setting, and we may need to filter the questions. Today, we think it would be great to understand why you, our audience, is joining us and what you're hoping to get out of the session. So we have a quick survey for you all. Are you currently looking to find your team for a potential build or renovation? Click the box and we'll get back to you with the results soon. Simone, you would have supported many dozens of clients who've decided to add you to their team. But in your opinion, what are the first steps people need to take before selecting their team?
Yeah, I think that there are quite a few steps, and I think we're going to talk a lot about the things today that you should do or shouldn't do, or who you should talk with. But I guess just to give a brief summary, I guess one thing is you have to be clear about what it is that you want. So, come up with a clear brief, what are the design features, what you're after, how much can you actually afford, what are the energy efficiency upgrades you want to do to the house, what do you want to put in terms of health consideration or energy efficiency as well as sustainability, where are products sourced from, how important is that for you? And also then think about, okay, who do you might need in your project team? It might not just be the designer or architect and the builder, there might be heaps of other specialists you need. So you have to have, I think, a good understanding of what it is that you're after. And I think a lot of research is involved as well.
So you're recommending that people do quite a bit of preparation before even starting to think about finding their team.
Definitely. I heard from so many people that came to us after they had started with another designer or builder, and they were quite frustrated because they went to this particular designer or architect saying, we want this really sustainable home, or we want to renovate a lot. And then throughout the process, they realized that the actual person didn't know much about it. And, they had to push the agenda, they had to ask for everything, and they were always put down, that's too hard, it's too difficult, we can't do this. Or even when it comes to the selection of builders, I can't tell you how many times builders then turn around and say, that's not right, you don't need that much insulation, you don't need double glazing, gas heaters are much, much more efficient. And then you just stand there, oh my God. How do we even start? How do we turn this builder around and or this person? And often you just can't. Sometimes when people are in their ways or in their thinking, you can't. So you have to investigate quite a bit, I think, beforehand to be sure they're really sustainable or they know what they're talking about. Yeah. Because it's such a trend thing at the moment. Everyone claims we're sustainable, we're green, we know what we're talking about, but sadly, many people don't. And there's this funny saying, some people say like sustainability is almost like teenage sex. So everyone is talking about it. Barely anyone is really doing it. And the few people doing it are sometimes doing it badly. So, yeah.
Oh, I haven't heard that before. That's great.
But it is a bit true. So, you have to ask proper questions to understand, are the people really know what they're talking about, or are they just trying to jump onto the sustainability train and try to get in?
You've just covered a lot there. We're going to unpack some of that. So there's definitely plenty more to unpack in all of those things. But what I took away from the very basic thing is that you need to have a clear idea of what you want first, what your brief is, as you say, what your budget is, and what you're prepared to compromise on, perhaps, as well.
Potentially, because the thing is, in an ideal world, I might be jumping a few steps ahead, but in an ideal world, if you could refurbish everything from your house, recycle everything from your house, that might be the most sustainable solution, but it might not be the most cheapest solution or the most affordable solution. And sometimes you have to make compromises, and you have to think about with you as a family, or according to the budget. Is it more important to save the money or stay within budget, even though it means you might not be able to fulfill some of your sustainability dreams or energy efficiency dreams. So sometimes there need to be quite a few compromises. So I think you need to know a little bit, what is your main driver, what are your must-haves and what are your would-like-to-haves.
Would you agree, Dick? Do you have anything else to add for what steps people need to take before they even start thinking about selecting their team?
Yeah, look, as usual, Simone's nailed it. We can go home now.
Much more to it, but thanks.
Yeah, look, we point people towards resources like, say, the Your Home series, yourhome.gov.au, as a primer. We say, look, get your head around that, and you will be well informed whether you proceed with us as designers or not. Whoever you choose to go with as a designer, architect, or builder, if you got your head around what's in the Your Home series, then you've got the basics, and you won't be steered away by, as Simone said, you don't need that much insulation. Etc. Double glazing, you don't need that around here.
I'd also add maybe subscribe to Sanctuary for a couple of years. And
I absolutely support that 110%.
What about you, Iain? First steps that I guess if clients are coming to you and have taken certain steps, what is it that makes you happy that they've already done? Or what thinking they've already done?
Well, it makes it so much easier if they're already on the same page. If they're coming to me and I'm trying to steer them in a sustainable direction, or teach them that you don't need your gas cooktop and let's orientate the house the right direction, some really basic things, that makes it so much easier if they're already across the basics, and they're willing to do their own research and they've got time to put into it and they're engaged. That makes a huge difference to getting started.
I guess not everybody's going to have the time or the inclination to do the research, but the other things can still be the case, can't they? That they're well informed.
I love providing people information, and yeah, it's just getting that initial direction. Yeah, it's good.
And think if I just can jump in quickly, even if someone doesn't have much time, but I think exactly for this reason, the sustainable house day events like this one are perfect. And, I think there are a few with sustainability 101 or something, you watch one, you spend 1 hour or 2 hours and at least you know the basics, you know what you need to look out for. And I think even if you don't have that much time, you're building your forever home in most cases. So, you spend an absolute fortune on it. So you're probably going to spend hours and hours looking at tiles or kitchen finishes. I think you should at least spend 1 or 2 hours to get the basics right about your home, because, it's an investment, but it's also about your health and, the future of your family.
Yep.
I'm a great... Go ahead, Dick.
I was going to say, I'm a great fan of Kath and Kim, and I remember when they were planning Kim's wedding, and they were running out of money, and Kath said, "It's all right, Kimmy, we can always skimp on the essentials." It's just that's. I mean, they were making the point in reverse, obviously, but that's the whole point. Get the essentials right. Don't compromise on those things. Because they are the things that are at the core of the building. Every minute of every day, life of it.
There's also some really good online stuff and some podcasts and things like that that might sort of speed you through. I listen to the Sustainable Builders podcast and really enjoy listening to Dwayne Pearce from D. Pearce Constructions in Queensland and Amelia Lee, undercover architect.
Yeah.
They're some great information out there. I'm sure there's more podcasts. Maybe a few people can put some up in the chat that, they like listening to.
I think it's probably fair to say that if you are on the time poor end of things, it's even more important to get the right team.
Yes.
If you're the kind of person that wants to entrust more of the decisions and decision making to your team that you're going to be employing, then even more important to make sure that those people are on board with your vision and your values and are going to do it right, so that you don't have to be necessarily watching them every step of the way. Let's jump into how you do actually find those kind of people that are aligned with your own. I think I'm going to assume that all the viewers here are actually Iain's ideal clients and that are wanting to get off gas and to build an energy efficient, sustainable home. So we're going to assume that that's what you're looking for, people who can, a team who can bring that sort of vision to life. We're lucky enough to be joined by 2 building designers and a builder tonight, which is great, but what sort of experts do you actually need to have on your team to start? More than that, right? Probably. Is there a one-stop shop for this, Dick, or do you need to really need to do your legwork and shop around?
Well, to my knowledge, there is not a one-stop shop, certainly not in a national sense. There have been a couple of attempts at it over the years, but things change, people change, and so I don't think there is one. And so it's important that people do their own research, and the kinds of questions that you should be asking around. So by becoming forearmed with knowledge, as long as it's authoritative knowledge and not from some weird fringe thing, but so which is why I keep saying sanctuary and your home and passive house and undercover architect, and the sources that are authoritative and recognised and basically
independent.
By the broader peers in the industry. But once you have that kind of knowledge, then you've just got to start asking the hard questions and making sure that the person you're speaking to, whether it's a hydraulic engineer or an architect or a structural engineer or a builder, whoever it might be, just ask the questions to check that they understand the basics as you understand them. And if they have a different view, find out why. And maybe, maybe they've got some valid points, but they need to be able to defend those points on an evidence and scientific basis, and just to make sure that there's an alignment.
So you just listed a whole lot of different experts that weren't in my list there, Dick. So engineers and structural consultants and so forth. Is everybody going to need those on their build, or is that a case-by-case basis?
Increasingly so, yes.
Yeah.
And a structural engineer who understands, for instance, if you're going down whether you're going down the passive house route or not, you need to understand thermal bridging and condensation risk and thermal transfer through the building envelope. And a structural engineer who doesn't understand that will just design steelwork, for instance, that bridges from the outside world to the inside of the building, and it's a thermal highway, both, in both directions in the different seasons, and it's really bad. So having an engineer who understands the need for thermal breaks in the structure is quite important. If they don't get it and they argue against it, then find another engineer.
Is that something that is finding an engineer in that way something that the homeowner, the onus is on the homeowner all the time, or is that something where if you find the right architect, for example, or building designer, they will bring those sorts of people to the table as well?
They should. So if you've found the right architect or building designer who's switched on, gets it, is on your wavelength, then the professionals they bring to the table should also be the same. But it's also worth asking the question.
Yeah, fair point. Simone, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just thinking the same. It's so important to have a good team. So collaboration is everything. So ideally, like Dick said, you need a structural engineer and a builder. I'm a big believer getting a builder on board early on. And you shouldn't just get all the plans, everything done, and then start talking with a builder. That usually never goes well. So, ideally you get the builder in at the design stage, or at least at the end of the design stage or something like that. And then you can have proper discussions with the structural engineer and the builder and potentially a hydronic engineer. Or if you have interiors as well, if you want to use interior, you have them involved. Or if you want landscape designing done, you get the landscape designer or architect early in, that everything works together. Or if you have a special focus on grey water recycling or solar panels and things like that, try to get all the experts in and try to all talk with each other. And ideally, if you decide on a builder and an architect or designer and they have their network, then, talk with them, check them out and see, if you get along. Because ideally, if you have a team that works well with each other and that trust each other, that's already half won, the case. Because sometimes you get, parties involved, that might say, we've done this a lot of times before, we had it in the past that we had structural engineers that said, we've done so many ZIPs construction, structural insulated panels constructions. But then when the structural engineering came before, like, oh my God, what did you do? You didn't include them, you completely messed it up. So, what are you doing here? So, it's really important that you have consultants that, they work well, they're on the same wave, on the same level that you are, like Dick said. And that's, really, really important.
So don't necessarily trust that your trusted designer, the consultants that your trusted designer brings on board, don't necessarily trust that they are going to be similarly qualified, or
they should ideally, but it might be worthwhile in double checking, or even asking your designer or architect or builder, why do you recommend this person? Have they done a similar project, or do they know about thermal bridges, or have they done a passive house before, or have they done strawberry before or hempcrete before, especially when you go a bit more experimental. So you need sometimes to check a little bit in as well.
And if the answer is, oh, I'm not sure, then that's probably not a great sign.
Maybe not.
Never assume, assumption, assume.
Yeah. Iain, as a builder, do you how often do you get called in earlier in the planning process to consult, and do you like working that way?
Yeah, I love working that way. I'm not a big builder. I haven't jumped through multiple projects yet, but that's certainly the direction I would like to stick with, is being involved as early as possible, and being able to build that team early and build that trust and really build that relationship, get to know the designer, and get to know the client before we jump into a building contract.
Yeah.
So having a builder involved early is great from so many directions. It doesn't lock the client into using that builder if something deteriorates during the process or the pricing doesn't work out and we can't find ways around it. It's a really nice way of the builder gets to see everything in that job and really gets their head into the project before it gets too far out of hand. Once it's past that design stage, if a builder's coming in once the permit's issued and going, hang on, what is happening with this engineering? Why didn't we change the slab to footings? Why did we do it this way? It's too late. The time and effort and pain to go back through building permits at that stage. I love being involved early. It's great.
Simone, it reminds me of the webinar that you and I did together last year on the cost of building. And one of my big takeaways from that conversation was you talking about the benefit of bringing a builder on early, because and it's true that I hear a lot of stories about people who've had a false start with their build because they've employed an architect or a designer, they've got their design, and then once they've spent a long time finalising it, then it gets put out to tender in the traditional fashion for builders, and they discover that it's going to be wildly out of their price range. So you were saying in that conversation that one of the ways that costs can be kept under control is to bring a builder and other experts too, I guess, in on the design part of the project earlier, so that they have a say and so that things can be tweaked to minimize costs.
Definitely.
And also prevent those horrible shocks.
It should be a conversation. We like to see a conversation where we have a design and we think it's going to end up with at a certain price point, but we have this relationship with a lot of existing builders, and we try and introduce new builders to this method as well, where we say, okay, price the bare bones of this, just put some provisional sums against the curly stuff like kitchens and wet areas and joinery and so on, because that's all very movable feast anyway, whether depending on the minor selections, but this is the floor area, this is the kind of structure, this is the insulation, this is the roofing, the cladding, etc. Let's price that and then see how do we sit. And if it comes back and it is too high, then we have a conversation and say, okay, what are their options here? How do you see this? Where are the price points, and what can we do now to adjust things to bring that price down? If it's on the money, of course, everybody smiles and proceeds happily.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's so much more than just trying to meet costs. Like it's buildability, it's airtightness, so much comes into it in that early stage.
Material availability.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to understand how houses can still get all the way through to the end and then go through the tender process.
And another thing what I find as well, if someone has spent, years and years probably on a design, it went through town planning and then through working drawings and then through tender, and then suddenly they get told, you can't build this house. It's heartbreaking because they were already imagining living in that house. Yeah. And if that step happens during the design stage, it's still a bit heartbreaking because, that they have to change the design and they might not get the absolute dream home. They must scale back a little bit, but at least, they know this early on and they can adjust accordingly, rather than spending years and years on a dream and then realizing you can't make it. I think that's really heartbreaking as well.
Yeah. So I think we've gone down a little bit of a cul-de-sac here of how to work with your team once you find them, which is not strictly the subject we were going to start with, but it's really, really interesting and important information anyway. Just before I get on to the next question, I'm going to give our viewers an idea of what the poll said, the survey at the beginning said. Are you currently wanting to find your dream team for a potential build or renovation? About 36% of people said no, but hoping to in the future, or 40% said no, or no, but hoping to in the future. And 23% said yes, they're looking for a team for a renovation, and 34% said yes, they're looking for a team for a new build. So a pretty good split there. So interesting to see that there's a fairly even split between new build and reno. I guess the difference in experts that you need is not great for those two things. depending on how big a reno you're doing, I suppose.
I would almost say for reno extension, you might more experts earlier on.
Okay.
It might be worth getting a structural engineer in earlier to determine which walls are structural or not, or if there's any damage, or even looking at the house if there's some mold issues or issues like that in a sense, or talking with a builder about buildability or potential issues early on. So it might even be worthwhile getting someone in earlier than if you were to build a new build.
To get a handle on all the unknowns of an existing building. Yeah, good point. And so what should people be looking for in their experts, and what questions, well, where should people start when looking for professionals that do share their vision and sustainable values?
I think expertise.
As someone mentioned, everybody claims to be sustainable now. How do you find out who really is?
Yeah. So I think expertise in an expert is always good.
How do you assess that though, Dick?
Yeah, indeed. So I track recommendations from people whose experience you are aware of and have first-hand experience of, or trust at least, is always good. But asking the questions that come from your own research, from based on that authoritative kind of information and learning, and then also once you've found your main expert, and that is most commonly either if you start with a builder, it might be the builder, or if you start with a building designer or architect, it'll be that person, and use them as the sort of filter, if you like, the tester of the other experts. But really the thing that you should be able to point, or they should be able to point to in every situation, is their track record, and say, well, in such and such a case, we had these issues to deal with, and this is what we came up with, and this was therefore the result.
Yeah.
And I think there are some red flags as well. If you ask a question, and if you should probably turn around and go. So one thing what I find is if a builder or anyone, or designer or architect says, oh yeah, we've built this highly energy efficient 6-star home, I would just run around, turn around and run away, because there is no such thing as a energy efficient 6-star home. That's a legal minimum. Or if they say, we built this really energy efficient home and it had, and then, you should ask, what did you do? Or, why was it energy efficient? Or we put solar panels on the roof and we had solar hot water. Again, you should run, because that's nothing special. So you have to test them a little bit. And if they can prove they have done something, perfect. But I had a question from someone a while ago about the same topic. And they said, but what about if I'm starting out? What about if I'm starting out in this industry? I'm a young builder. I really want to do sustainable homes, and I haven't something to show yet on my own. That can be a bit tricky. I guess in this instance, you might just ask them a bit more questions. What would you do? What do you know about efficiency or air tightness or passive house or things like that, just to dig a little bit deeper. And another thing might be, what are their credentials? Have they maybe done the certified passive tradesperson, for passive house course, or are they a member of Builders Declare? Or, are they showing somehow that they're interested in this subject field, or is it just something, where they're trying to get a bit of money out of it?
Yeah,
certainly
Builders Declare is
someone's level.
Go ahead, Ian. Sorry.
Gauging someone's level of knowledge and then looking at their expertise or qualifications is a great way if they don't have examples behind them, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, and I guess for that you do need to have a certain amount of knowledge yourself, which is circling back around to what Dick was recommending right at the start, which is to skill yourself up a little bit if you don't feel like you have enough knowledge in that area yourself, via your home or other reputable kind of publications. I'm not thinking of any others in particular, of course.
Yep. But I think what you have said before, it might even be, if you're time poor, you don't know that much about the industry, but you want a really healthy, sustainable home, you probably should go to a really experienced designer or architect or a really experienced builder who has done it before. But if you're really keen, you have lots of time to research yourself, you actually want to do all the legwork with the materials and things you want to use, then probably you can go with someone who's a bit less experienced, because you can be behind, but you need to have the time and willing to do the extra work, I think.
Yeah, and I think at an absolute minimum, those people have to be keen to learn themselves and keen to listen to you as well, and take on board your ideas and suggestions and so forth, if they're not super experienced themselves.
What I often say, often clients come to us and they say, we found this amazing builder, we really, really love him. He has so many recommendations from family or friends, but he's never done something like this. What can we do? And what I find is often if someone is really keen and eager and really, really wants to do it, that can work well. Sometimes you might have a builder that's been in the industry for 30, 40 years. They've always done the same thing and they don't want to change a bit because they know everything, how it needs to be done. And if you have someone like that, there can be perfect craftsmanship, whatever, but there might not be the right builder for a project like this. So you have to be a bit, be careful, are they actually willing to change something, or will they bang on the project I mentioned before, where the builder then originally said, we're really sustainable and we want to do stuff. And then now, over the course of the project, he's been infiltrating the client a lot. And then she took out insulation, she put in gas hot water again, and put out all the good things again, because the builder told her it's actually better, you don't need this. And then,
Yeah.
It'd be challenging.
Disappointing to hear stories like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
A couple of questions have come in from people. So 2 questions about people in rural situations, regional projects. One's about builders and one's about architects, and they are a bit different in this context. So how to approach situations where in regional rural areas where builders are not abundant locally, and those with a focus on sustainability are really rare, first of all. Tough one.
Yeah, I would say get in early. Some of those builders, I grew up in the Northeast and still keep contact with some great builders up there who are really sustainable minded, and they're booked out a couple of years in advance. So you have to be realistic with your time frame and understand that cost increases and all these things are part of it too. But getting in early and not waiting until you're ready to build would be my first tip there.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think in the sustainable realm, builders are really happy to recommend other sustainable builders. I know around Geelong, we've got a really good group of guys, and if I'm too busy and people are asking me for recommendations, I'm more than happy to pass on other suggestions in the area.
And what about if there just aren't any, or, just aren't any, or there aren't any that are going to be available for 5 years or whatever? What do you do then?
Yeah, if I can jump in. So we have the scenario that we work with quite a lot of projects that are in regional Victoria or even New South Wales. And then what we try to do the good thing is, for designers or architects nowadays, in time where everyone has Zoom or Teams, you can pretty much work everywhere on projects. But what we then often do is we try to work with some prefabrication system. And nowadays, there's several in the market. And then what it means, you have the prefabrication company, and in many cases, they actually might come and install the panels. So that means you need a local builder. And again, ideally you have someone eager, who's willing to work with you, even if they haven't done anything like this before. But pretty much they have to prepare the site for the panels, and they get proper, instructions on what need to be done. And then the panel provider team comes and installs the panels. And typically the house is then kind of up to lockup stage. And then a local builder can take over again. So that's an option we find that can work quite well if you're
and then you can oversee that, I guess, from afar if necessary, to a certain degree at least.
Yes.
Yeah. So the second question from Jared is also about regional projects, but in relation to design.
Sorry, can I just answer something there too?
Yeah, go on, Dick. Sorry.
And I hope I've been muting myself because the aerial rowdy boys are having their evening screeching session, and I'm hoping it can sort of reverberate through the microphone like it's going through my head.
No, not hearing it. It's all good.
Okay. We often have a builder who says to us, look, I don't know about this sustainability stuff. Where do I start? And we basically say, can you read a set of plans? Can you follow a specification? And can you hear that? Can you always ring us when you have a question? Because there are no such thing as dumb questions. And if you answered all those 3 as yes, then, it's pretty straightforward. And I mean, I've got a builder working on my own home at the moment who 10 years ago, we had that exact conversation with. He came to us saying, I don't know about any of this stuff, but, he was recommended as being a good, honest builder. And we thought, well, that's a great start. The ethics are right. And we said, can you read a set of plans? Can you follow a spec, etc.? And he's taken to it like a duck to water. He's now one of the best passive house builders in northern Sydney. So,
So I guess the takeaway from that is, as long as you've got a builder who you can trust not to go off piste and decide for themselves that a certain thing that's specified on the plans is unnecessary or whatever, then it should be doable, even with a builder who's
absolutely.
not.
Having said that, we have a lot of respect for builders, and I'm not doing this to make Iain feel better about life, but
Thanks, Dick.
but builders have a tough life. They're exposed to massive risk,
Yeah.
and they carry a lot of warranty, and so on, but they're also usually pretty savvy about finding smart ways of doing things. And if a builder comes to us and says, you've drawn this detail this way, but if we do it this other way, we can probably do it faster, cheaper, use less material, whatever it might be, and we'll go, let's talk about it. Let's and sometimes it's, no, you can't do that because, as often as not, it's nice idea, great, let's do it, go for it.
And
absolutely.
I think what I find really important as well, we spoke about a bit before, that you really like the builder and that you get along. Because, one builder might be perfect for the one couple, but, they might not get along with the others. So what we often say is, well, is go and speak with them, have a look at the house, what the builder has done, maybe speak with a couple of references. And in some instances, one might really click with one person, but not that click with the other. But, you're spending a long time with them. You have to get along, you don't have to get best friends, but, you have to get along with each other and you have to trust each other. So I think it's a really personal thing as well. And I had even cases in the past. We had this one project where we had at the end that the client really wanted different quotes. So we had 3 different quotes, and one of them was much more expensive than the other, but he was a really small builder, if I can say it, not a nice website, not many photos, not good in marketing or anything. But I think he was $150,000 more expensive than the second builder. The second builder, on the other hand, had done many, many awards, amazing online presence, many, many awards. So he's a good builder. But after the clients went to both, houses from them, they actually found that the quality and attention to detail of the smaller builder much, much better. And so they were willing to pay the $150,000 more for this smaller builder.
Wow.
It can be really, really different and really, really personal.
Yeah. And I'm sure that the same thing doesn't only apply to the builder, but also to your designer or architect as well.
Okay.
Really important to have a good rapport.
Renew is a non-profit membership organisation. Along with running Sustainable House Day, we also inform government policy, advocate for a fair energy transition, provide resources for climate disaster resilience, and publish 2 magazines. Sanctuary magazine provides trusted independent information for people looking to build or renovate sustainably. Renew magazine is a leading voice on sustainable technology developments shaping the energy transition. These magazines grew from member newsletters in the 1980s and still maintain their grassroots independence and practical approach. Both are incredible resources, and subscribing is a great way to support us to transform Australian homes for climate and energy resilience.
Getting back to the question I was just halfway through asking, Jared wants to know, in the context of regional projects where knowledgeable and experienced professionals are thin on the ground, as they often are, how common is it for designers to take on projects outside of their local region, or is a designer with local experience considerably more valuable? I would say it matters less than with a builder, but
I think for
the experts, tell me what you think.
I think for renovation extension, it can be really helpful if you have someone local, because you might have to be there more often. New builds not as critical, but renovation extension, it can be helpful to have someone local.
I guess I think it's more important to have the right person in control of the project rather than worrying too much about where they are. But having said that, one of the things we've done fairly often, I guess, is partner with someone local. You have to find the right person who's willing to kind of, in a sense, it sounds really condescending, but they're playing a supporting role because you're the design director. But the other beauty of that is that they, and the ones who approach it with the right attitude, see it this way, they are learning and becoming the local expert.
Yeah.
You know, it's a couple of projects and they're going to be so far up to speed. So, you know, it's a win-win really.
Yeah.
Ross wants to know, if you find builders you like, can you ask to visit some of their previous projects?
Yep. Definitely. It might sometimes be hard, you know, for them to be, because they don't want to bug their clients all the time, but, you know, so
Yeah.
you have to respect that a little bit as well. But typically there should be an option. It can be, you know, much easier if they have a house that's almost at handover, you know, a house that's almost finished, rather than needing to ask clients, maybe, you know, especially if people have small kids or something and, you know, busy lifestyle might be a bit harder. But yeah.
Yeah, I can kind of imagine that if there were very happy clients who were very keen on this builder and had a really great experience, that they might actually be quite happy to, you know, show off their house to potential new clients.
Yeah,
Quite good to aim for as a professional to you know, have relationships with clients like that.
Yeah, absolutely. But you just can't overdo it because people will start to get worn out by it.
Yeah, sure. Are the terms SB would like to know, are the terms designer and architect interchangeable, or do they refer to specific roles or qualifications?
Here we go.
Question.
This old nut. What's
It's old chestnut. Go for it, Dick.
That's the word I'm for. Okay, so you are not legally entitled to use the term architect unless you are registered with the Board of Architects in the state in which that person practices. And if that person practices across borders, they have to be registered in every state they choose to practice in. Now,
when you say practice in, does that mean the address of the project, Dick, or
project?
Okay, so if you were doing projects around Australia, you'd have to be registered with 6 or 7 different boards.
Board of Architects. Yeah, it's it harks back to the days of railway before there was standard gauge railway. You would think that in the 21st century there would be there's cross-border recognition of qualifications, but that doesn't the qualification does not allow you to trade using the name architect. So that's
You'll have to pay for every single state. That's another thing.
Okay. So you can have done an architecture degree and have an architecture qualification and not be allowed to practice as an architect if you're not registered.
You can have a master's in architecture, you could have a PhD, you could have a double PhD in architecture, and you may not practice calling yourself an architect unless you are registered with the Board of Architects.
Okay.
So that's the term architect. Building designer is a more generic term that covers architects and other people who are not registered with the Boards of Architects. And the reality is that anybody can call themselves a building designer. There are various states, well, typically Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria and Tasmania, who have put in some kind of registration or accreditation process whereby you can call yourself an accredited or registered building designer to indicate that you have met certain professional standards and qualifications and so on. So the building design, and in New South Wales is quite a good example in that the legislation around who can do what in New South Wales always uses the term building designer. And then somewhere else it will go off and define which type of building designer can do what.
Yeah.
For the purpose of the conversation tonight, interchangeable.
Yes, thank you.
And I guess you can have really good architects and really good building designers, and you can have really bad ones from either group as well.
Yeah, and it's not when we're talking about this kind of level of residential projects, being new builds or renovations, or even sort of small multi-home, 3 or 4 on a block kind of projects. Either a building designer or an architect can do the work, and it's not like one's excluded from.
No, that's correct.
Yeah. That was a very laborious way of saying exactly what you just said, much more succinctly, Ian, that for the purposes of tonight, interchangeable.
I'll let Dick go. Give him a minute. Yeah. Sounds like you've heard that one before, Dick.
Lived and breathed it for 20 years.
I'm always very careful in Sanctuary to check whether check that I get it right, because if I accidentally call somebody an architect who isn't then in print, then it can backfire. They can get in trouble for it. So Bron would like to know, is there some form of accreditation for a professional sustainable design practitioner? Sustainable design practitioner, as opposed to any old design practitioner.
Okay, no, not really. There are postgrad courses, there are CPD courses. There's no kind of special qualification in the design, purely design kind of discipline. There are obviously some academic qualifications in environmental studies, in science, etc., and so forth. And there are quite a few architects and building designers who have done those other qualifications and combined them with their design qualifications or skills, etc. But I think the thing to probably look for more than anything else is if they're an architect, the real one with the
Capital A.
do they belong to Architects Declare? Because that demonstrates two things. One, they've made a commitment, and which they are duty bound and professionally bound by ethics to follow through on in terms of how they do what they do. But it also probably indicates that they've done a lot of CPD or other postgrad study and may have some, postgrad certificate or some other thing that reflects that. If they're a building designer or an architect, the only one that I can point to with any degree of authority is the Sustainable Design Masterclass, the SDS, Sustainability Design Series, the masterclass that was run through the Building Designers Association a couple of years ago, and was running up until COVID hit, and then it's still in the process of being turned into a hybridized kind of course because it couldn't go face to face. But that was a 4-day course which gave a qualification which had some recognition in the academic framework, the world of academic frameworks. So that one was also particularly useful. But yeah, you've really got to just start asking the questions of, this is assuming you're looking for a professional with some specialist qualification. You've really just got to ask how they know what they know.
So it's not that anyone who calls themselves a sustainable designer needs to have done that qualification or anything like that. No.
It could be greenwash.
Yeah. So you just got to ask the questions.
And I even had, with some people from the industry, obviously now when you work in the sustainability industry, you talk with many other designer architects that work with big firms. And, there are a lot of big firms out there, I don't want to name and shame, but some, a lot of firms that on their website, everywhere they say how green they are. But then what often might happen is that the design, everything is as per usual, like they've always done it. And then at the end, they try to make it sustainable because they have to. Which is a bit difficult. So therefore you have to be a bit careful, with who you go with as well. They might have the credentials on their website, but they might not practice what, it that much.
Yeah, it's easy to write things on a website.
Yeah.
Although I find when I'm researching architects and designers online that I don't know about, that if they don't mention anything about sustainability on their website, then that's a pretty good indication in the other direction. So if they do mention it, doesn't necessarily mean they're super great at it, but if they don't mention it at all, you can usually just ignore them. Susie would like to know, where do I find a list of really sustainable architects and designers to approach? One place is the Architects Declare website, as Dick has already mentioned. Any other suggestions, folks? There is no kind of exhaustive definitive directory of these things, I know.
The BDA have been working, that's the Building Designers Association of Australia, BDAA, have been had a directory called findadesigner.com.au, and it has been taken down for various reasons to do with the database and it's technical back of house stuff, and it's still not back up. I'm not sure what the time frame is on that, but their intention is to get that back up with a more up-to-date database. And one of the things I think they were trying to do was to have some kind of verification process, which is quite difficult, so that it kind of, if they say I'm a sustainable, if they, if they tick or want to tick the box of the kind of work they do, and they've ticked, multi-residential, really, well, in some states you need qualifications to do that. what are your qualifications? That needs to be verified.
Mm.
Sustainability expert. Oh, really? Well, how do you verify that? So they're trying to build in some, checks and balances to make sure that people are real.
Yeah, but I think you can look at places like Sanctuary Magazine, Sustainable House Day, who is participating in these events, or even, who's active online, or, who's, out there and talking about sustainability. Or another thing, like we said, builders declare, architects declare, who's a certified passive house designer or who's a certified passive house trade. There are all sorts of ways where you can look and check, who's in the market.
Yeah, so the short answer is there's no definitive list, but there are lots of lists that people can dive into. I always recommend that people get their hands on some back issues of Sanctuary, look through and find projects in their area, or not even necessarily in their area, for architects and designers that they really like, and contact those professionals, because they are obviously all, they are all checked. Getting back to involving a builder in the design process early, we've got a couple of questions relating to that. How do you approach the time investment of a builder at the start from a payment point of view? Is it an hourly payment type arrangement, or how does that work?
Yeah, so in our situation, I think there's a few different names for it. It might be a negotiated tender process. It might be a pre-construction agreement, or it might be a paid as consultant kind of agreement. I like the word paid as consultant because the builder's in there as a consultant. I think that's nice and clear.
They're not employed as the builder yet necessarily. Yeah, are they?
Yeah, I think it describes it perfectly. And generally there is money changing hands, which gives a commitment from the builder that I'm going to put time and effort into this. And it's a commitment from the owner that, I'm interested in really hearing what you've got to say. There's standard agreements for pre-construction agreements through the HIA or the master builders. It's a loosely binding contract that, is between the builder and the client.
Yeah,
okay.
So I just want to say, I think that is quite important. So I've spoken with many builders in the past, and they got really burned of clients, saying, we want to build with you. And they spent hours and weeks or potentially even months with those people. And then they just turned around and left. And at least if you do that, there is a bit of commitment and, honesty and seriousness of both sides. So I think that's quite important. And, Iain, for you as a builder, you can spend hours and hours, working on a project. And I think, they need a bit of, compensation for that as well.
Yeah, sure. And is it usually and kind of by the hour sort of arrangement at that point of the project, Iain, or is it a fixed cost kind of thing?
We'd normally work on a fixed sum. Normally maybe 0.5% of the build estimate. It's not a huge amount of money, and it's far less than what the builder's going to be putting into it. If the builder's spending, upwards of 30 or 40 hours trying to price your project, going to meetings, showing you around building sites, providing you information, I think it's money well spent, even if you don't end up going with that builder. You're getting a consultant in to provide you with as much information as you can. Yeah.
Well, that answers the next question. Somebody's asked, how much does it cost to involve a builder through that early design process?
In my limited experience, anywhere from $1,000 to maybe $7,000 or $8,000 for a massive project, or something that needs heaps of input from the builder. Simone and Dick, what have you guys seen in the industry? I'm interested.
Yeah, I think I've seen anything between $1,000 and $10,000.
That's really good information.
Yep.
Right, you do?
It's usually at the lower end of that scale, but it needs to be something significant to get a significant input.
Of course, yeah. I don't think anyone's disputing that. They're just keen to know how it works and what sort of ballpark figure they'd be looking at if they were going to go down that path. I would say that's absolutely cheap to avoid the heartbreak of taking a finished design out to tender and not being able to build it.
I would worry that if you weren't paying a builder for that you might feel really committed to them, like they've given you all this information and now the pressure's on that you have to stick with them. And I also think that the builder may see it as, well, I'm just going to price this as a square meter kind of open-ended agreement, and when we get into it, there'll be some variations and it'll all work out in the end.
Yeah.
You're trying to avoid all of that.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. Where to next?
Can we maybe just knock that myth that Adam and Sierra have raised, knock that on the head in the Q&A?
What's that, Dick?
With two passive house specialists here, it'd be great to hear about how they recommend someone to a high performance home. We're hearing that these start at twice the cost of other sustainable houses and 3 to 5 times a standard house, whatever a standard house is.
Absolutely. I was going to save that for later, but sure, let's
Oh,
dive
yeah, okay. I'm sorry.
Take it away, you guys. You're the experts.
Well, if you call a standard house a project home by one of the usual project builders, you have to be very careful about what you're getting, because they should be building to 7 stars now in most states of Australia, except the Territory, fair enough, and WA. WA, I'm looking at you. Anyway, and I look, minimum compliance, and they often game the system, and so on. I'm not going to badmouth them any more than that. But when you're custom building something, it is going to cost at least 50% more than a volume built project home. You're getting more than 50% better value. There's no doubt about that. But there's no way it costs 5 times as much or 3 times as much. And a passive house, in our experience, and we're now doing more than half of our new builds as passive house construction, the premium is anything between 3% and 5 to 6% over a standard passive solar home. So I don't know, Simone, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I totally agree. You can't compare it to a volume builder house, and even I've seen so many houses, or even nothing against craftsperson, or they're good and bad ones, but sometimes designs are just really, really bad. The houses are so badly orientated that there is some reason why some people charge a bit more than others. So you have to be a bit careful not just to look for the cheap. But then when it comes to custom designed home, what people often do is they are just going to call it waste a lot of money on finishes or architectural features, because often there are the things that make the architecturally designed home or the custom homes expensive. And sometimes just a change from whatever a single or a really simple metal cladding, could be $40 per square meter. If you go to the custom folded something, it might be $300 or $400 per square meter. So a decision like this alone might bring your budget up by $50,000 or $80,000, depending on how much it is. And then you add a bit of whatever custom timber cladding somewhere, and you have another $50,000 or $70,000. So it's not so much actually the passive house details that add the money. It can be the pling factors or the architectural features that bring you awards or something. Sometimes it might be part of that, a little bit more the wow factor or the sexy factor that brings the cost up than actually the efficiency.
Yeah, my understanding of passive house is that really it's about, perhaps you'll be paying for a mechanical ventilation with heat recovery system, which you might not in a normal house, in a standard house, and you'll be paying for really great building wrap. Yeah. And you'll probably be paying for more insulation, and that's about it in terms of extra stuff.
And the QA of the building process. That's the thing
and maybe a little bit more labour because it will be done more carefully and with more attention to detail. And so it really
one thing as well
costs very much more than a really well built non-passive house.
Iain might have a different perspective on that, but I suspect he's probably going to agree.
Yeah, well, maybe I want to say 1 second, in just one thing about, building services or something. So what I often find is that people that come to us and they want a passive solar design home, and then they talk about, we want hydronic in-slab heating, and we want the fireplace, and we want evaporative cooling. And if you look at all those systems, they add up a lot. So say, for your hydronic heating, you might maybe pay whatever, $10,000 or $15,000. And you might have another 10 or 15 for the evaporative cooling that goes everywhere. And then you have another 5 for the fireplace. Versus if you go with a passive house, yes, you need the HRV system that might be 10 or 15 installed as well. And on top of that, you say you might need 2 split systems, but you're sitting there maybe overall at around 20,000 or 22. So you could potentially actually sit at less money than if you were to go for a hydronic heating, a fireplace, and evaporative cooling. So actually that initial cost could be less. But the difference is if you have a passive solar designed home with hydronic heating, that heating has to run constantly. It's fairly efficient, but you still have a fairly reasonable amount of ongoing costs every month. Whereas with the house, the initial cost is a bit higher, but then suddenly you barely have any bills.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you do, even if you do need reverse cycle systems, that you will need much smaller ones, and you won't need to run them so much. Yeah. Ian, what's your take on this?
Well, first of all, I'll put my hand up to build some passive houses. I would love to, and I feel like the Surf Coast in Victoria doesn't have enough of them going on, and that's not just because I'm a builder, but it's such a nice area, and people are so passionate about the environment, but there's not enough beautiful passive houses getting built down here yet. So hopefully that changes in the next few years, and I'll be out there building some passive certified houses. But I think some simple things are reduce the footprint. If the costs are getting out of control, then make it a smaller house. Be smart with the design. Cut out some things that you don't need so that you can still afford that certified house, or if the certified house is out of your budget, then stick to a high performance that, you're still going to get a great house. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Just to recap for anybody who might not know what we're talking about, Passive House, capital P, capital H, is a building standard that originated in Germany as with the German spelling, which involves a very airtight, very well insulated building envelope, and importantly, post-build testing to prove the maximum airtight, prove that it falls within the maximum airtightness and a certain maximum amount of energy use per square meter of floor area as well. So it's a building standard that is pretty high performance and rigorous. And there's plenty of information about it in Sanctuary and also via the Australian Passive House Association if anyone would like to know more. Just trying to make sure that we don't use too many terms that people might not know what we're talking about. Next question. What should we go with next? Has anyone else got their eye on the questions coming in and got anything they'd like to dive into next?
Sarah's asking about mechanical ventilation.
Oh, yeah.
Ceiling fans and so on. And I'm going to answer that question, but expand on it if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Dick.
Because it's a team question. So the ventilation design of a building needs to be taken seriously. It's not to say that you necessarily need a mechanical engineer to design the system for a single residence, unless it's a very complicated residence or very large, and we're kind of trying to steer people towards smaller buildings anyway. But what we've found is that you need in pretty much the whole of Australia, you need ceiling fans as the cheapest, most energy efficient way of achieving efficacy, which is one of my favorite words, meaning the most effective means of moving air around a space. Ceiling fans just do it very, very well. But what is that air? Is it fresh air? Is it chilled or heated air? And the systems for controlling those are separate. So to bring fresh air into a building is where you need the heat recovery ventilation system, so that typically, winter night, you've locked the house up against the cold outside. If you don't bring fresh air in, especially in bedrooms, you're going to get a buildup of CO2 overnight, and that can reach dangerously high levels. And the more airtight the building is, perversely, the worse that will be. So that's why HRVs are so important. But even with a very efficient building, there is still probably going to be a need, except in immediate coastal or very mild climates, for some sort of mechanical device to clip off the peaks of the overheating periods and bushfire kind of weather, and the cold snaps when it's snowing somewhere nearby. and so that's the mechanical system that adds a little bit of heating or cooling, and perhaps also just takes out humidity for comfort. But with ceiling fans and HRV and aircon working together, you need to have that system thought through so that they're not fighting each other, so they're complementing each other. And so it's important that it's thought through way back at design stage. Do not think of these things as Nippon clip-ons. They need to be integrated into the design from the very outset. And yeah, the builder can take care of it, provided the builder understands, how they need to work together and be integrated.
And one thing maybe what I often hear people say, I have a 10-star home, or I have a passive house, I don't need any heating or cooling. But like Dick said, no matter how good your house is, you still have the humans in the picture. Imagine it's winter and you leave the door open for too long and you have to heat a little bit, or similar the other way around. If it's, hot for days, 40 degrees, and you just can't cool at night, or again, you leave the door open because you have a barbecue or something, what you going to do then? So I would always put at least, 1 or 2 small split systems in a house. No matter how good your house is, you need a little bit of help every now and then.
Another argument,
hopefully you won't need to use it much.
Yeah, indeed. And the argument we usually have with air conditioning contractors is they go, 2.5 kilowatts, that'll never do it, mate. You need 15. We go, no. No, you don't. But the other thing with HRVs is, in terms of resilience and providing refuge in extreme conditions, in bushfire conditions, when we're saturated in bushfire smoke, a good HRV with the insertable filters. Sorry, I'm going towards my camera here, Pretend I'm inserting a cartridge into an HRV. You can put in a PM 2.5 cartridge into one of those that will take out in excess of 90% of the smoke particulates. Someone in Canberra has actually done the numbers of this, and they found that during the recent bushfire events, well, a couple of years ago now, they were removing 93.7% or some number like that of the fine particulates, meaning that inside the house you really couldn't smell the smoke. Now that is a very healthy situation to be in when everybody else is drowning in smoke and particulates. So there's lots of reasons to do these things with HRVs and other systems.
HRVs are heat recovery ventilation systems, which is another name for mechanical ventilation with heat recovery.
Thank you.
2 different terms, same sort of thing. It's a mechanical ventilation system that takes heat from the internal air before it's exhausted and transfers it to the fresh air coming in, so you don't lose so much heat energy from your house.
Or cool. Warm
or cools, depending on the season. Yep. Simone.
And maybe if I can jump in a little bit, and I always try to hold myself back because I'm a huge passive house fanatic, so I always try to not, steer the ship too much. But one thing as well, what we do in our practice, we use the passive house planning package, the actual passive house calculations, to fine-tune all our designs. So even if a project isn't going for certification or not even interested in passive house at all, we use it to fine-tune always how much insulation is needed, what is the ideal window specifications, where do we need shading, and do we need internal shading or external shading, or eaves and external planting and whatnot. But what's also really good when it comes to the ventilation or the heating and cooling loads, because the program will tell you then how much heating and cooling do you need for the house. So that can actually influence then or inform how big your split system is. Because like Dick said, often the installers say, oh, you need those massive systems, when you can say, no, actually, I only need 2 or 4 kilowatts. That's all I need. And then, you take away the guesswork. So that's, I think.
Yeah. And what Annie would like to know, what are the certification and documentation costs roughly for a passive house? To if you do want to certify your passive house, what sort of ballpark are we talking here to get that certification done?
That is a bit tricky. It depends, who you talk with, but you need the cost for the actual calculations, which can be anywhere between $3,000 and $7,000, maybe, depending on who you go with. You have to pay for the certifier, which can be between $3,500 and $4,500. And then you have to pay some extra for the actual drawing part of it, because you have to produce much more drawings for the certifier. And there might be some additional cost for the builder, but it's I'm not sure.
So
it's a bit extra.
Our rule of thumb when we're talking to new clients about this is if it's a small, simple building, it'll be about 10,000. If it's a bigger, slightly more complex building, about 15. And
Okay.
that's sort of 3 to 5% extra on the building cost side as well.
Okay. Yeah.
And really, you know,
so that's very far from the original question of double a sustainable house and 3 to 5 times a standard house. Good to know. Timothy would like to know what I was talking about when I mentioned really great building wrap products. So building wrap is something that should be in all new builds now, vapor permeable building wrap. But when it comes to passive house, usually the building wrap is the airtight, functions as the airtight layer. And so it needs to be a really good quality one, and it needs to be sealed, taped and sealed really carefully. Correct me if I'm wrong here, you folks who are certified in this area.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So whether or not you're doing passive house, the wrap on a building is going to either be include an airtight layer or not, and it will always include a breathable layer, so that the insulation layer can normalize with the outside world. But the thing that you can't do anymore is leave gaps in wraps or gaps in insulation. It's just really poor practice, whether you're certifying passive house or not.
Yeah.
And maybe one thing as well with breathable, because that can be a bit, confusing, because people think, we want to get the house airtight, but now you're talking about breathable. So the thing is actually that the water molecules are different than air. So, what it means is that water can still go out of the house, that you don't trap humidity inside the house. So,
water vapor, that is.
Yeah, water vapor. So that's what's mean with breathable. So it's not that air just travels through your house, because we're trying to make it airtight, but we want to make sure that humidity doesn't get trapped inside. And that's one bit of my pet hates, what's been happening over the last few years with the construction crisis or material crisis, that more and more steel frame construction are going up. And, it can be done well, but in most cases, steel frames create such massive thermal bridges. And what can happen is that inside your walls, you have water pooling or, standing over years, and then your whole house can start to mold away. And no one is really thinking about those sorts of things. But it's a whole different topic.
Just on the issue of wraps and how they work. Then
we'll get back to the subject of the webinar, but go ahead, Dick.
the really good breathable wraps, you can form into a cup, fill them full of water and drink from them, and the water won't leak through. And then you can put that to your mouth and actually, with a bit of force, breathe through it. So it's, they're quite extraordinary.
So getting back to the subject, thank you very much, everybody, for that little detour into passive house details and design. It's endlessly fascinating for me, and hopefully the viewers as well. Getting back to finding your team, one of our viewers has asked, where do registered building surveyors fit in with all of this?
Yeah, they form part of the team. They're not going to be the core team, but they're just like any of the other consultants. They need to be on board with what you're trying to achieve. It's probably, not going to be something that you're going to be able to research on your own as a client, but with some referrals from the builder and the architect or the designer, piecing it all together, that there's plenty of great building surveyors out there that are willing to help and not just want to stamp things and check things. They're just another part
what's
of the team.
benefit? What's the potential benefit of finding a building surveyor who is sustainability minded, as opposed to any old building surveyor, old school one, let's say?
I wouldn't think there's a big gap to a building surveyor who's sustainably minded, who's going to make a major impact on the build. It's more about finding someone who's going to be flexible with your team and be willing to work with you through the process and not just throw out red flags and hurdles.
One thing is as well, if you want to build something a bit more experimental or something that doesn't have Australian registration or certification, it can be tricky, because there is it's a little bit of a gray area. So there is kind of a rule: if a product has a European or American certification, they are allowed on the Australian market, but the building surveyor has the right to refuse them. So therefore, you need to upfront have a chat with them. We even had the case with one project that we had the client had engaged a building surveyor, and actually we didn't talk with him much, but they spoken with him and said, we want to use structural insulated panels. And the building surveyor is like, yeah, that's fine. And then halfway or pretty much shortly before construction was about to start, he wanted the certificates. And then he was like, I didn't know you were importing them from overseas. I thought you were getting them from Australia. And they were like, no, they actually already ordered. They're on the ship. And then he said, I'm not going to sign off on them. And several engineers, independent engineers who signed certificates that everything is fine. And he refused to sign. He didn't want to take the risk, or what he perceived as a risk. And so the clients had to go to the very complicated process with the building commission to remove that building surveyor and get another building surveyor. So it took a long time.
Wow.
So therefore, as a tip, if you want to use something that's a little bit different, it's important to have these discussions with the building surveyor upfront.
It's a really interesting,
amazing
really
story,
good tip.
Simone.
Yeah.
A bit heartbreaking, yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one. The situation, the other part of the question in there was about the inspections on the energy efficiency side of things. So who checks that all the insulation is in place? And those things, they often don't get checked. And I don't want to sound like I'm on a hobby horse, but I probably am actually. With Passive House, you can use the blower door test and thermal imaging as a proxy for a lot of other QA aspects, but they're really easy things to check before the building is lined. When it's locked up, the blower door test tests the air tightness, and that tells you what the condition of the wrap is. And a thermal imaging check will tell you whether all the insulation is in place or not. Those are things that this building surveyors or certifiers, depending on which state you're in, don't do. That's outside their scope. So that's another reason to go with Passive House, or to use the Passive House kind of process.
And another issue is, like you said, that with the building permit, in theory, say you have a 7-star rating, your building should perform to 7 stars, but sadly, no one is really responsible for it. So in theory, neither the builder nor the building surveyor, no one will check it. And therefore, it can actually happen that a lot of insulation and things are missed. But what I had a good friend of mine, or a good friend of mine, she was building a house, single lady. So, she got the homeowner approved, but she had to go with a volume builder. But I spoke with her a lot about, we looked at the plans. I gave her some advice. She upgraded some of the insulation. And then what she actually did when the insulation was in, she went there with her dad and they put spray foam insulation themselves all around the windows because their builders hadn't done it. And I told her all those things, and she did her research herself and on YouTube with her dad and how to do it. And they fixed all the gaps and things. There are some things you can do, but you have to invest a little bit of time into it, or if you don't want to do it yourself, maybe get an independent inspector or something. But you have to be sometimes a bit proactive as well.
We've got a question here on SIPs. Sorry, Iain, go on.
Just following on from what Dick said, the building surveyor is going to check structural compliance, and then other than listing on your plans that it's containing the right levels of insulation and it's got the right windows installed, he's not going to check anything until the house is pretty well finished, and he's going to come through and do your final inspection. There's no requirement for insulation or anything along those lines to be inspected in Australia, just that it's stamped as designed. Unless it's Passive House certified.
Even if I go back to my friend before, so she moved into the house, I think before winter, and then she was wondering the whole winter, why is my house so cold? Why is it just not getting warmer? And then they realized that they actually hadn't installed an exhaust fan for the laundry. So she went up there herself, and then she saw that the entire insulation was just lying in the roof space. It was actually not installed, still packed in packages. And I'm like, oh my God.
I've heard that story more than once too.
Yeah.
We provided the insulation.
Yeah, it's there.
It's in the roof.
At least it was there, it wasn't missing. Yeah.
Yeah. We have a question. We were just mentioning SIPs before, which are structural insulated panels. We have a question about from someone who says they're interested in SIPs construction and double glazing. Experienced builders and designers in my region are unavailable. Who do I get advice from on these products for my designer and builder? Do I get them from the manufacturers or from somewhere else?
Yeah, I guess, go to forums, there is the, my energy efficient home. There are lots of resources as well about, what window manufacturers to use, do a bit of research and get quotes. And some of the window manufacturers, they might have their own installers, that might be a good option if you have, if your builder doesn't know what to do it. And similar even with structural insulated panels. If you Google it, there's several companies in Australia now, and most of them have their own installation team as well. So that can be sorted by that.
Anything to say about SIPs when you're an architect and builder, haven't really worked with them before, Dick?
Yeah, look, it's not rocket science. The most important part really is to get the design detailing right. So that when they arrive to site, they all go together the way they should. There's nothing worse than thinking you're with a high-speed system that's going to go together like Lego, and then having to pack things out or cut things down because the detailing was wrong.
Or do what seems to happen just about every build on Grand Designs, where they have to, modify the steel structure on site. So that would be a matter of getting your designer, even if they're not experienced with SIPs, to speak to the SIPs manufacturer and
And ideally, even early on, some panels might lean itself to certain spans or heights or something. So ideally, in the design process, you speak already with the manufacturer you want to use and make sure that everything works in the system, rather than similar thing, rather than designing everything, get everything documented, and at the end try to make it work. So again, if you include them early in the team in the process.
Mostly those kinds of people now have fairly sophisticated CAD modeling systems of their own, and they'll import your design when, in cases that we've worked with, they import our CAD model and then they rebuild it from within using their components, and they send it back to you, and you can see your design with each of their SIPs, how they're, you can see each individual one, how they're connected, how they're found, like everything. And then you can kind of compare and make sure that it all fits perfectly. So that's usually not too hard, but it's worth checking.
Yeah.
I wonder, in this scenario, if the owner and the designer are keen to use SIPs, but the builder's unsure about it, maybe he needs to talk to some other builders who have been using it, or potentially engage one as a consultant to assist. They're very quick to install. So chances are there'll be someone who'd be keen to lend you a hand and come and help you fly them in or check over the design. Or if the builder's keen to use them, there's certainly ways to do it.
And typically the first one might be a bit challenging, but once you had the first one done and you had help with it, the second one will be a breeze. It's just that initial, little hurdle.
Holly is asking about a potential team member that we haven't mentioned yet. She says she's starting a renovation with a limited budget and considering using a draftsperson. What are the chances of finding a sustainable one? And I guess my question is that even a thing?
Well, I mean, a draftsperson by definition is someone who draws a plan under the direction of somebody who's the design director, if you like. So somebody conceives of the design, and however that is documented in sketch form or whatever, the draftsperson is the one who then documents it for construction and approvals and so on. So I think what most people mean when they say that, they just are going, I don't want to go to an architect because they're going to cost too much. I'll go to a draftsperson. What they're really talking about is a building designer. And so, refer back to previous discussion around building designers and architects.
Yeah.
But I think
when I said, is that even a thing? I said, what I meant was, is a sustainable draftsperson a thing, or it's not really a sensible sort of distinction to make?
No, I mean, maybe I'm just being a bit of a stickler for terms, but a draftsperson is someone who draws up what they're told to draw up. They're a document.
Yeah, that's my understanding too.
They know exactly how buildings go together, and I'm not trying to say they're not skilled people. They know exactly how buildings go together. They know exactly what has to be documented, but the design decisions they're assuming are already made by somebody else. That's the critical thing. The first point is design. Before design is the brief. This is all the stuff we talked about at the beginning of the session.
For sure.
Brief, knowing what you want to achieve, and a design that responds to that, and then you document that design. So to just jump straight into a draftsperson is documenting what? You need a design. Who's going to design it?
And I think you have to be careful as well. We often have people come to us and they have designed their own home. And, sometimes people might have spent years and years on working and fine tuning on this floor plan, and they know exactly what they want, and they want to know exactly where everything goes. But it can be really dangerous if you just document that, because, there is a reason why you study architecture or building design or something, because you learn certain things. You learn, it's about building codes, it's about planning regulations, but also about how to live in a house, that you don't bang your hips if you want to go from the toilet and wash your hands or something, or that you can actually open cabinets. So I've seen so many times plans where you just could not have lived in the house, but people wanted that floor plan. But then you need someone who documents that, who knows that, and there are some drafts person probably who know those things and will advise the clients and say, actually this isn't working, or, the orientation is actually really, really bad. You don't have any north windows in the house. I've seen someone had sent me some plans through, and I thought, oh my God, where's the north arrow? And then I thought, you got to be kidding me. There was not one north facing window in the entire house. And I just thought, no, actually, I think you have to do a few changes here. So, you have to be a bit careful with those things as well.
Mm. So I guess there's probably a fair few people out there who maybe they're extremely knowledgeable in this area, and they're not a designer, but perhaps they really do know a lot about orientation and sensible floor plans and so forth, and perhaps they are planning to essentially design their own house and then maybe get it drawn up by a draftsperson. Would it my feeling is that it would probably be a sensible idea to at least run it by a designer and get some help to sort of fine tune the design, even if you don't go with a designer or an architect right from the get-go. What would you say that that's a sensible approach?
Yeah.
Or engage a good energy assessor to assist as best they can.
Mm.
Yeah, I have my doubts, to be honest. I just think that there are so many nuances to design that just even saying, well, the orientation's good, away we go. But, as Simone said, what if the simple ergonomics don't work?
Yeah.
And even then down to, well, your bedrooms, how are you going to ventilate those? Bolt on a device of some kind later, will that work? Who knows? The design needs to be conceived as a whole properly from the outset, and then documented correctly. And look, the Your Home series, the Your Home website has got a series of type designs. They're kind of exemplars, and you could take any one of those and because they're open copyright, and you could go to a draftsperson and say, here, draw this up for my local government approvals process.
For my particular site.
Yeah, but every site's different, and they're published there as exemplars to say this is the kind of response that you should be, the pattern of this design is what you should be seeing for this kind of circumstance. But it's not saying take this and copy it and build 50 of them in Smith Street. It's just, that's not how it works.
Yeah, they are a terrific resource though.
Yeah, they're great.
And you can actually download the full construction plans for free for those designs that you then need to go and get slightly customized for.
That's it. So that's
slightly or more than slightly customized for your particular site, for sure. But they're a very good place to start especially if you're on a bit of a budget.
But that adaptation is where you need some design sense, and it's possible that you could then delve through all of the previous chapters of the Your Home manual and work it out. It's all there. But it's going to be a long, slow process, and the layperson may not have the confidence. In fact, I would say almost certainly wouldn't have the confidence to know that they'd got it all right.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
At some point, you just need an expert eye.
Yeah.
Another important thing is, for your home, you can take the designs, but often people, they copy designs from somewhere else, even from a volume builder or something. And
Yeah.
copy-wise, you can't just take the design from someone else, go to a draftsperson and say, look, I want to copy this design. And, you might actually endanger or, put that person into legal, quite some legal trouble. So you can't just copy something from someone else and say, draw this house for me.
That's a really good point too. Yeah. So I was wondering how you three would recommend that people handle any conflict that might come up once you're in the build process, once you've chosen your team and you're in the thick of it. If it goes bad, or if conflict comes up, what's the best way to navigate that? Or a team that you just feel isn't seeing your vision, or isn't, despite your best efforts at the beginning when choosing your team, your goals your values don't end up aligning after all. Then what?
Well, I think the most important thing is to review the contract and understand what the responsibilities of not just the builder or the architect or the designer, but also your responsibilities, and get a really clear picture of what's going on and what the issues are. And then it's just got to be conversations after that, to me.
Yeah, look, trust. Yeah, you need a contract, but the best contract in the world is worth very little without trust in the person you're dealing with. And, I had this conversation with someone the other day, and they said, oh, no, look, if the contract's right, it underlines everything and you'll be guaranteed. And I said, would you sign a contract with Putin? Well, no. So why? Because you don't trust the guy. Well, no. So if it's founded on trust. And if there is no trust at the start of the process, then don't proceed. And if there is trust at the start of the process and things then run off the rails, the open communication to try and resolve the issues before they grow or fester is the first step. So it's about communicating expectations, also communicating disappointment or frustration. At the outset. I had a text a little earlier from someone just questioning whether something had been left correctly on site, and was the building going to be compromised by weather because it didn't look like things had been weather protected properly. So before that becomes a problem, we jump on it and we check with the builder and just make sure that things have been done correctly. Just because somebody looked at it and thought it hadn't doesn't mean that it hadn't. But if we don't act on it early, then it can fester. What if it wasn't right, or something blown off, or who knows what? But and then if that doesn't work, that's when you then pull the contract out of the drawer and go, okay, now we're into something more formal by way of resolution, and that's why we have contracts.
Yeah, I think it's like you all said, open communication is important, but also being clear with everyone in your team what your vision is, or if there's some really things that are non-negotiable for you or what you want. So I heard this one sample from someone that for them it was really important to keep all the vegetation on site. They wanted to keep all the certain trees and whatnot. But then what actually happened is they had a demolition company engaged, and no one briefed them, no one told them, and they cleared the entire site. And things like this, that was devastating. Now the clients were just crying. And things like this, you have to communicate with everyone in the team, what is the vision, what is important, because you can't just assume that everyone knows. So it's about clear communication from either side as well.
Yeah. Ian, have you had any experience of things getting a bit bad, or communication not really working as cleanly as you would have liked it to?
No,
got any advice?
I think that just comes back to what Dick was talking about, in that, it's got to be based on trust and open communication, and the sooner you can establish whether that's there or not, the better. If it's not there, then either party, if it's not there for me, I need to finish it up. And if it's not there for the client, they need to make the decision to finish it up.
What do you mean by finishing it up exactly?
Well, I suppose finishing it up in that early stage, once you pass that contract.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Then it's messy and complicated, and I really hope I never get to that point.
Right. So what you're saying is there's plenty of scope for saying thanks but no thanks before the contract's signed.
Absolutely.
And that people should feel entirely comfortable with, it's probably not going to be a comfortable conversation, but with walking away if that seems to be
Yeah.
best thing to do.
Yeah, I would much
then once
rather
the
have
contract's signed, that's a lot
disagreement
harder.
early in the stage. Yeah. I'd quite welcome open discussion and probably not disagreement, but I'd really like to know as much as I can and get really deep in that early stage.
Yeah.
And get to know the client and they get to know me, and that they build trust, and you might have a few negotiations and it builds bridges and the trust gets stronger. That's a great thing in the early stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to see people in people's true colours, I guess, and that can be hard when you're in the early stages and everyone's trying to be polite and nice and so on. And no
Honeymoon
one,
period.
yeah, that's it. No one's under stress until something goes wrong. I've got, I don't know how much time we've got, but an example from many years ago when we used to use a fairly simple specification, and it said basically generally concrete slabs shall be laid on a vapor barrier membrane, just the plastic membrane. And the concreter on that job, who was a lovely man, was laying the driveway. Now driveways are external slabs. You don't put them on concrete unless on plastic unless you've got a particularly porous subbase or for some other reason. And so he was pouring the driveway and it wasn't on plastic. And the owner, whose true colours we had yet not seen, came out with the spec in his hand, and he just stood there watching with the spec in his hand. And then he, for about 5 minutes, then he walked away. And they put a progress claim in, and he said, "Oh, I'm not paying that." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Oh, because that driveway wasn't laid on plastic and the contract says it should be." Now, if he had a concern, any fair income bloke would have said, "Hey, you're pouring and you're not putting this on plastic. What's the deal?" And we would have said, "Well, it's an external slab. It's pointless. You don't need to." But he used it as as a way of squeezing money out of the builder. And it turns out the guy was an arms dealer. Can you believe it? So, we should have seen that coming. So, it's about trust and open communication. Yeah.
Further to that, I would also caution against someone who's just a yes person. They're saying yes to everything. They're not arguing. They're just shooting off prices to you, and everyone's happy, and then you realize that you might have skipped over a bunch of details, and then the contract's signed, and variations start piling up.
Yeah.
Another thing that can be tricky is I had that sometimes happening in the past, and and I guess everyone has their process. As a design firm or builder or architect, you have your processes, what you do in a project to make them work. And then if you have someone coming to you and says, I don't need this, I don't need this, I don't need this, cost this off, I don't want to pay for them. So yeah, but the project doesn't work if we don't do these steps. So, we can't take it out. And then, but I don't want to pay for that. So take it out. And so, no, I'm sorry, we can't do this, then we just can't work together. So sometimes you have to be careful with those things, because like I said, sometimes there are proven steps or things you just have to do to make sure you get the quality at the end. And then if someone questions the way how you typically do things, then it might not be the best fit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I'm hearing is that there's a lot you can do before you sign the contract to make sure that you're going to that you've got the right team. Of course, that's what we've been talking about for the last hour and a half. But also that you are going to, as far as you can possibly ascertain, have a good and productive communication for the rest of the project as well, if any conflict does come up. And then once you've signed the contract, everything gets a lot messier if things do go a bit bad. So that's all of that is just another very big reason to do your due diligence at the beginning, make sure you've got the right team on board.
I think we've gone on a lot about this tonight, engaging a team early, but that's the idea of the conversation. And I think it really benefits everyone when you get that early team and everyone starts building that trust. The clients are happy because they're getting lots of information, things seem to be progressing. The designers are happy because ultimately they want a happy client and they want to see their designs built. The builder wants a smooth process where he comes out of the end of it with happy clients. And some of that troubleshooting that can cause problems later hopefully gets solved early. So I'm a big advocate for it.
Evelyn would like to know, who do we include in our team to consider accessibility and universal design? Is it a sustainable architect likely to be across accessibility as well, or is it best to add a separate specialist for that?
if things are really complicated, then a specialist can help, but they're usually around compliance with standards on larger, more complex buildings. So if it's a residential, and I think that's our focus tonight, then the principles of universal design are now reasonably well understood by the design industry, but they've also been incorporated into the National Construction Code. And so it's kind of you can't get out of this anymore. You've got to do it, you know.
Yeah.
If people don't understand it, then they need to do some CPD to get their heads around it. But it's compulsory.
Yeah. So the quick answer is that all designers, not only ones who focus on sustainability, we're going to be required pretty soon to be incorporating it into all designs.
Yep.
But perhaps for more complicated projects, an extra consultant might be handy. Sasha would like to know, does the project brief form part of the contract?
It should, to some degree. So, you need a clear understanding on, what it is that you're after, how big the house is, what the features are, and what you want. Because if you kind of halfway through the process change your brief and suddenly you want whatever, double the size of the house or lots of other different things, there will be a bit of a change in scope. There might be extra costs needed for that, for the build as well as for the team working on the project.
But it's not really not so much that you have an appendix at the back of the contract, which is, here's my brief, and all those things need to be ticked off. It's more that it's incorporated into the
if
design,
you're talking about the contract with the designer, and the brief may well form part of the contract, or a reference to it should certainly be in the contract.
Okay. Yep.
The construction contract would not normally include the design brief, except by inference back through the design process and their contract with the designer.
Yeah. So the brief generally includes things that are going to be incorporated into the design, as opposed to things that are going to be incorporated into the build process. Is that fair to say?
Well, it can cover both.
Yeah.
I guess the construction contract also says, basically says, I agree to build that design.
That design, yeah.
On that site for this much money. You know, that design and that specification on this site for that much money. I mean, if people were perfect, that's all a contract. That's all a contract would need to say.
We actually have a viewer who's asking, are contracts written in plain English and are they easy for the client to understand?
Well, they certainly should be. Most of them are, at the residential scale. There's a contract, AS 4200 something, which is the one you'd use if you were building the Opera House. That one will make your eyes water and you run screaming from the room. But at the residential scale, they're all pretty easy to understand. The various departments of fair trading around the country, I think most of them have their own version of it, which is supposed to be very even-handed. There are people who criticise certain industry-led contracts. I probably don't want to name names here, but that they are somewhat biased towards the builder. There's one that is jointly produced by the Institute of Architects and another building industry body, which is generally agreed to be fairly even-handed. So, I think most people would assume that the contracts have been tested in court, and that's true, they have. That doesn't necessarily mean they're free of bias. And a contract, for instance, that has no reference to the passage of time is a troublesome contract, because you can have a building that, and I'm thinking of one right across the road from my own house, from a volume builder that is now well into its second year of construction. Second year, it's into its third year of construction, because there was no completion date and no penalty for going over.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So Iain, when we're talking earlier, you were mentioning that one of the biggest concerns you hear about early engagement of builders, in this case, is how to avoid being ripped off if you're just using one designer and one builder. And have a little
Yep.
talk about that, as opposed to shopping around, I
Yeah.
suppose, getting 3 quotes, which is what everyone tells you to do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it can be a concern, and I think there's a few counter concern. You know, it goes the other way as well. If you're really concerned, that you're not bound to that builder, you could always ask for another opinion. There's quantity surveyors and estimators out there that you could also engage to have a look over the plans. But I think it's important to see that that builder being engaged is probably saving you money if you can identify some ways to bring the costs down through changing to engineering or changing to materials or other specifications. So it's a really easy way that you're not going to know about later to save some money early. We had a pretty good case on a recent build where there was already a BEL rating for the property. We went through and did our own assessment and realised that they were way off. I don't know where the BEL rating had come from, but we asked to get it re-rated, and that saved the clients $40,000 to $50,000 from
Wow.
for a $1,000 outlay, and we fixed it in a week, and we were back through our permit process, all straightened out. Huge change to the design or to the outlay. Yeah. I think it's important that engaging that builder is going to help you meet timeframes too. So there's some costs to be saved there. If the whole thing flows through the design and straight into a build, and you're renting or looking to sell your other place, or material costs are disappearing, and the project's moving, then that's a great thing as well.
And I think the other big thing is, if you work with a builder early on, the builder can reserve a spot for you, so you can all plan towards a starting date. Versus if you go to the standard tender process, by the time you finally select the builder would not have known if they can start now. So, you might have to wait many months before the builder can start. And in most cases, most builders have their preferences, for footings or claddings or whatnot. So almost in most of the instances, by the time you engage a builder, there will be changes. There will be changes to engineering because some materials are not available, or, he has an idea how to do it cheaper or differently. And that will cost, again, more money just for the changes and more time delays. So there's an accumulation of other issues that come after standard tender process.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the timeline. Yeah. Dick, you wanted to you had something to say about owner builders in this context?
Well, a couple of questions have come up about how the team works with owner builders, and I think it's
a really good point. Yeah,
really even more important to have a good team with an owner builder. Why do we have owner builders? That's a different kind of question, and humans love building things, so I understand why people want to own a build and they want to put their own sweat equity into it, and maybe it's financial as well. But I think right out front, I'd say engage a builder as a consultant for starters, because they're going to give you a lot of shortcuts, but you need to pay for that. You can't expect them to give away, years of experience for nothing. But then having the rest of the team need to be much more proactive with owner builders. They need more support, and they should get it. And owner builders often have the advantage of, because they are passionate and they're putting sweat equity and an emotional commitment into the building, they can do all sorts of things that would not be cost effective for a commercial builder, or they, for them wouldn't be commercially viable. So there are some good things that can come out of it. Our question for people who say, I want to own a build is, we ask them some pretty hard questions about their management expertise and so on. They don't need to necessarily be good at swinging a hammer. They need to be really good at programming and understanding how a building goes together and what the detailing needs to be, so that they can program it and plan their cash flow. And basically it's a business, it's just a business project. And that's, so, I don't know. Yeah. The other guys might have another perspective on that.
I think there's lots of different levels at which to be an owner builder. You can, actually be building your house, everything except for the, electrics and the plumbing and the other sort of certified trades. Or you can not pick up a hammer at all and essentially be a project manager, is my understanding. So or anywhere in between.
Yeah.
But yes, I agree with everything you just said too, Dick. We are really getting to the end of our time, ladies and gentlemen. I wonder if, just to finish up, I would really like to ask all of you for your number one tip on this topic. What's your top tip for people who are looking at putting together their team for what is probably going to be the biggest project they deal with in their lives, certainly one of the biggest expenditure items ever? What's your top tip? Simone. Iain, go on.
Iain, you go.
I think start early, be flexible, and take time to build that team. Don't rush into it.
Mm-hmm. Simone?
Yeah, like we said before, collaboration is the key, and don't leave energy efficiency for the last or as a, add on at the end, get on early on, either with passive house calculation or get a thermal performance assessor on early on to assess your design. So don't leave it to chance, be proactive and make sure the house is as energy efficient as you can, because at the early stages is where you can have the biggest impact.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. What they said, and look for passion and commitment, and blow away the greenwash.
Yes.
Okay. Any final comments or things that you'd like to contribute for our listeners tonight, or should we wrap it up there?
My only final comment is that if you get a good team and everybody's focused on a good outcome, you can have robust discussions and arguments in the classic sense about what works, what doesn't work, what would be better, etc., and so forth. And through all of that, it's actually really good fun.
So that's what we're fundamentally aiming for, really, isn't it? Is to take on this giant project, spend a lot of money, end up with a fantastic house, but most of all, actually make sure it's an enriching experience as well.
Yep.
Sounds good to me. Thank you very much, all of you. That brings us to the end of our session tonight. Huge thanks to our wonderful panelists. I really enjoyed chatting with you, always. Iain, for the first time for you, but it was great to have you. Thanks again to our sponsors of tonight's session, Natters, Your Home and Design for Place. And to our listeners, we hope that you join us for next week's extension sessions, where we'll be exploring sustainable building materials. Huge topic, very important, and lots of nitty-gritty to be digging into, so please join us. And don't forget that if you join, renew or subscribe to one of our magazines this month, you will go into the draw to win an electric scooter from Benzina, valued at over $5,000. This is one time where I wish I wasn't a staff member of Renew, because it makes me ineligible. Follow the link in the chat to get on board with that. And of course, if you opt for a Sanctuary subscription, you'll be in time to get your hands on our winter issue, which is out in late May, which will focus on the latest in hempcrete building in Australia. Thanks again to today's wonderful panelists, Simone, Dick and Iain, and good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.